The first thing they buried wasn't steel. It was the truth. I still remember the smell that morning. Hot tar, diesel exhaust, and cut cedar from the decorative arches they were bolting together like they were building a movie set instead of ceiling over a working rail line. I came around the bend in my truck and saw black asphalt steaming in the sun, rolling right across the spur that had served my property longer than most of those board members had been alive. For half a second, I just sat there with my hand on the wheel, listening to the low metallic clink of a paving rake striking rail. Then I saw what they were doing. They weren't paving near it. They were paving over it. My name is Daniel Mercer, and that strip of track wasn't some abandoned relic hidden in weeds. It was a private rail spur legally tied to my land, 32 acres my father ran before me, and his father before him. We used it the way it was always meant to be used, receiving palletized fertilizer, feed additives, and machine parts for the agricultural supply yard I still operated on the back half of the property. Nothing glamorous, just contracts, invoices, forklift tires, early mornings, and enough routine freight traffic to keep 3 local farms on schedule through planting season. The rails mattered because timing mattered. Miss one delivery window, and the damage rolled outward like a crack in ice. The HOA liked to pretend none of that existed. A year earlier, the subdivision had been carved into the old pasture land bordering my frontage road. Big stone monuments. Imported palms. A name that sounded expensive and insecure at the same time. Their board president, Celeste Waverly, had made it her mission to elevate the community image, which was apparently code for erasing anything that reminded buyers this county still moved grain, lumber, fuel, and freight for a living. My spur crossed the entrance corridor in a recorded easement older than her manicured empire by almost 4 decades. It was in the county plats. It was in the title work. It was in the railroad's service map. It was stamped, filed, renewed, and actively used. I had shown them all of it. The first letter I sent was polite. The second had copies attached. The third came from my attorney and included the operating agreement, the easement language, the crossing specifications, the servicing carrier's schedule, and a warning so plain a child could have understood it. Do not obstruct active rail access. I even hand-delivered a packet to Celeste during one of their board meetings. She took it between 2 fingers like it smelled bad, glanced at the top page, and told me their beautification contractor had confirmed the line was defunct. I asked her if her contractor was also now the county recorder, the railroad, and my insurer. She smiled the way people smile when they've never been told no by anyone they consider important. What she didn't know was that I had already started documenting everything because men like my father taught me something simple. When arrogance gets expensive, paper survives longer than shouting. So I photographed the warning stakes they removed. I saved the emails. I logged the dates. I kept the voicemail where Celeste said, very clearly, that industrial remnants would not be allowed to dictate the aesthetic arrival experience of residents. I still have that recording. Sometimes justice begins as a waveform. That morning, standing beside fresh asphalt that shimmered like black water, I stepped out of my truck and felt heat hit my face. One of the crewmen looked up, then looked away. He knew. They all knew. The railhead was still visible in 2 places where the compactor hadn't passed yet, a dull line of steel disappearing under the new entrance like a body under a blanket. A decorative sign frame lay nearby, wrapped in plastic, ready to be planted where warning posts used to stand. I walked straight toward the paving machine, boots crunching over loose ballast half swallowed by tar, and every instinct in me said the same thing. Hot tar breathed up through the morning heat, thick and chemical, the kind of smell that coats the back of your throat and makes every breath feel expensive. The paving machine idled like some heavy animal feeding on my land, its steel drum ticking as fresh asphalt cooled over crushed ballast. A gull screamed somewhere above the drainage ditch. Nobody on that crew looked surprised to see me coming. My grandfather put that spur in back when diesel still meant something in this county. 1 line off the main, running straight across our acreage to the loading pad behind the warehouse. Nothing fancy, just steel, ties, gravel, and 30 years of invoices that said the same thing. Lumber in, palletized stone out, machinery when we needed it. The kind of line rich people call ugly right before they discover their landscaping plan sits on top of freight law. By the time I took the property over, the routine had become muscle memory. Tuesday inspections. Monthly switch maintenance. A short freight consists twice a month, sometimes more when contract loads stacked up. I knew the smell of creosote in summer and wet rust after rain. I knew exactly where the flange squeal started on the curve by the pecan tree. And I knew, with the calm certainty that only paperwork can give you, that the easement was active, recorded, insured, and impossible to wish away. That was the part Cheryl and her board never understood. To them, my warehouse was an eyesore at the edge of their manicured kingdom. My Spur was dead track, old iron, a stain on the sales brochure for their new grand luxury entrance. They sent polite letters first, all pastel logos and fake courtesy, asking whether I'd consider beautification cooperation. I answered with copies of the deed, the rail use affidavit, and the service contract with Gulf Central Freight. I even highlighted the sections for them. Yellow marker over black text, as clear as a stop signal. They kept going. The land itself had been in my family long before their stucco gates and imported palms showed up. Red clay under the topsoil. A warehouse built low and practical against hurricane wind. A loading dock patched so many times it looked quilted. Everything on that property existed for use, not admiration. The Spur was the artery that made the rest of it worth owning. Trucks could come and go, sure, but certain loads only made sense by rail. Heavier, cheaper, contract locked. Miss a scheduled delivery window, and the penalty clauses started chewing. That morning, watching asphalt spread over steel, I wasn't just seeing vandalism. I was watching somebody take a torch to timing, contracts, and access. The risk had changed. Part 1 was about them crossing a line. This was about what that line actually carried. A laborer near the screed glanced down as the edge of a rail shone through the black surface like a bone under skin. He hesitated. Cheryl didn't. She stood off to the side in white slacks and sunglasses, one manicured hand wrapped around an iced coffee, directing the angle of a stone monument sign still strapped to a pallet. That sign frame on the ground was no accident. They were replacing warning posts with branding. I stopped at the foreman first, not her. Different battlefield. You pave another 6 feet, I told him, and the first freight axle that hits this entrance could climb the head of that buried rail and tear your machine in half. There's an active spur under your asphalt. He looked at the railhead, then at Cheryl, then back at me. That was the moment the story changed. Not because he believed me, because now someone else had to choose whether to pretend not to. Cheryl clicked toward us on her heels and smiled, that expensive little smile people use when they think money can outvote physics. This track is abandoned, she said. Our attorney cleared the work. Too bad for her. The air inside the clubhouse smelled like lemon polish, burnt coffee, and fresh printer toner, the scent of people getting ready to make something ugly sound official. By noon, Cheryl had turned a construction dispute into an emergency board meeting, and every folding chair in that beige room was filled with the kind of homeowners who confuse landscaping with law. Through the front windows, I could still see the top of the decorative cedar arch they'd started framing over the entrance, bright honey-colored wood catching the sun, while black asphalt cooled over crushed stone that had once carried freight into my yard. Cheryl stood at the front with a laser pointer in one hand and a packet of renderings in the other. She wasn't wearing a hard hat now. She was wearing pearls. Same expression, different costume. Behind her, a blown-up illustration showed palms, uplighting, a stone monument sign, and a wide glossy drive where my rail spur had been flattened under fresh pavement. As you can see, she said, tapping the board, Phase 1 elevates community identity. We are eliminating industrial blight at the threshold of a luxury neighborhood. Industrial blight. That was the phrase she used for an active rail connection tied to recorded property rights and current contracts. A man in a navy golf shirt near the coffee urn muttered, "About time," and a few people nodded without looking at me. That told me everything. They didn't want facts. They wanted the view from their windshield to match the dues they paid. I laid my folder on the table anyway. Deeds. Easement language. Utility maps with the spur clearly marked. Railroad notices. Delivery schedules. Photos from 2 weeks earlier showing a freight car spotted on that same line. The paper made a flat slapping sound against the fake wood veneer, louder than it should have been. You paved over active access, I said. This isn't an opinion. It's recorded. Cheryl didn't even look down. Your paperwork is outdated. It was updated last quarter. Our council disagrees. One of the board members, a thin man named Brent with a flag pin and the posture of someone who had never been told no by a waitress, pushed my maps back toward me with two fingers like they were contaminated. The association has authority over the entrance corridor. No, I said. You have authority over landscaping standards and common area maintenance. Not my deed. Not utility access. Not a live rail easement. That shifted the room. Not because they believed me. Because I said it in a way that left no room for costume language. A woman in oversized sunglasses, still wearing them indoors, crossed her arms and said, "We invested in this community to get away from industrial traffic." I looked at her. "The rail was here before your stucco was dry." A couple people laughed under their breath. Cheryl heard it. The smile on her face tightened by half an inch. Then she changed tactics. No more glossy renderings. No more words like elevate and identity. She reached into her folder, pulled out a violation notice, and set it in front of me like a dealer sliding a bad card across felt. "If you continue interfering with authorized improvement work," she said, "the board will assess daily fines, suspend your access to community amenities, and pursue nuisance enforcement for commercial disruption." That almost made me smile. I don't use their pool. I don't play tennis. And nuisance enforcement means very little when the nuisance they're talking about is a man insisting they stop burying legal infrastructure under decorative asphalt. I picked up the notice. Fresh ink. My name is spelled. Parcel number wrong by 1 digit. You're threatening me with a fine based on property you don't control, using a parcel number that isn't even mine. Brent leaned forward. "You're being difficult." "No," I said. "You're being reckless." For the first time, Cheryl's voice sharpened. "We are finishing that entrance today." There it was. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Decision. The county office smelled like wet carpet and old toner, the kind of place where excuses get stamped instead of heard. I stood at the counter with a stack of paper so thick it bent my hand backward, certified letters with green return cards, the surveyor's plat marked in red, the easement copy, the railroad contact sheet, and 3 county filings with dates that proved I had been warning them for weeks. The clerk on duty barely looked up as I slid everything across the laminate. "I need these logged today," I said. "This is active access. They're paving over a rail line that still carries freight." She blinked at the maps, then at me, then called for a supervisor like I had just handed her a live wire. That was the first real shift. Not in their favor. In mine. Because paper doesn't shout, but it does bite back. By the time the supervisor came out, I had already laid every document in a clean row and pointed to the one thing nobody in that clubhouse seemed to understand. The spur wasn't a decorative strip of rust. It was a recorded easement tied to my property, and the railroad had already confirmed scheduled use. I watched him read the notice Cheryl's board had sent me, then compare it to my filings, and I could see the blood leave his face when he noticed the parcel number mismatch. "If they proceed," I said, keeping my voice flat, "the county is on record. The railroad is on record. And so am I." He tried to soften it with the usual bureaucratic fog, review process, internal questions, follow-up calls, but I could hear the change in the room. Somewhere behind me, a printer started chattering non-stop, spitting out copies of my complaint like a machine that had finally chosen a side. I went from office to office after that, not to argue, but to build a wall out of receipts. The railroad liaison returned my call while I was parked outside in the sun, and his voice came through the speaker sharp and tired. He confirmed what I already knew. The line was active, the access had not been abandoned, and the paving work could create a dangerous obstruction for both equipment and liability. I wrote every word down on the hood of my truck while the summer heat baked the metal under my palms. Then I sent the surveyor photos of the fresh asphalt creeping over the ballast, the steel half swallowed like someone trying to bury a pulse. He replied with one line that hit harder than any threat. "They cannot legally obstruct this corridor without formal abandonment." That was the moment the story changed shape in my hands. Not because they listened, because now they could no longer say they hadn't been told. I mailed another certified packet that afternoon, this one marked urgent, with the county filings, the survey report, and the railroad confirmation clipped together so tightly the staples tore my thumb. I addressed it to Cheryl, Brent, the board, and the HOA attorney. One by one. No room for confusion. No room for misreading. When I dropped it at the post office, the envelope was warm from my hand, and I remember thinking how strange it was that justice could start as something so ordinary. Paper, ink, postage, proof. But as I sat in my truck and watched the clerk press that stamp down, I also knew this wasn't going to stop the work. It was going to decide what happened after the work. And that question hung with me all the way home, louder than the engines, heavier than the tar, and a lot harder to ignore. By sunrise, the whole entrance smelled like hot asphalt, diesel exhaust, and that bitter chemical steam fresh tar throws into cold morning air. Orange vests moved through the fog like sparks. A backup alarm kept beeping in short, heartless bursts. Steel bucket teeth scraped stone. Rollers hummed. And right where the spur crossed the front edge of the development, men with rakes and shovels were burying 30 years of visible warning under a black, shining skin. The ballast was the first thing to disappear. Gray crushed rock that had always sat loose and sharp around the rails got drowned under dumped loads of aggregate, then flattened by a vibrating roller until it looked less like rail infrastructure and more like a driveway under construction. I stood on my side of the fence and watched the machine shake dust out of the crossties. Every pass packed the stone tighter. Every pass changed the track from something usable into something decorative, and that was the part that made my jaw lock. They weren't just blocking access. They were dressing it up. A skid steer came in next, pushing fill across the flange gaps. Mud and crushed limestone slid against the inside edges of the rails, clogging the very space train wheels needed to run. The operator never even looked down. To him, it was just another grading job. Behind him, two laborers wrestled up the white metal warning post that had stood beside the crossing for years, the one marked Private Industrial Rail Access in black block letters. One of them laughed when the concrete footing finally cracked loose. They dragged the sign across the dirt, laid it behind a stack of faux stone entrance columns, and covered half of it with a blue tarp like they were hiding lawn equipment. That's when I realized this wasn't sloppy work. It was curated. The board had turned out to watch. Cheryl stood near the new masonry base in a cream blazer and sunglasses too expensive for a construction zone, one hand wrapped around an iced coffee, the other slicing the air as she directed people who were actually doing the labor. Around her, board members smiled like they were unveiling a resort. Somebody had set out pastries on a folding table. Somebody else was taking photos for the community newsletter. The banner leaning against the clubhouse van read Grand Entrance Improvement, gold serif letters on white vinyl, as if font choice could overpower a property record. Neighbors drifted in and out to admire it. I heard words like elegant, upscale, finally, and overdue. One man in loafers said the rail line had always made the place look too industrial, and Cheryl nodded like she'd personally cured a disease. Fresh asphalt spread over the approach in a smooth black arc, trimmed clean against curbing they'd rushed in the day before. New limestone monument walls framed the crossing. Decorative lanterns waited in boxes. They were building prestige directly on top of functioning infrastructure, and they were doing it with applause. I called out to the site foreman once. Not to argue, just to make sure he understood what sat under his machines. He wiped his glove on his vest, glanced toward Cheryl, then gave me the kind of look people wear when they know the check isn't coming from the man with the documents. I go by the approved plan, he said. You got a problem? Take it up with the association. So I watched the last open sections vanish. By late morning, the railheads were still visible in places, but barely. Two dull steel lines trapped inside a paved throat, half embedded where the entrance widened, choked where decorative pavers crossed over them, useless where compacted stone had been forced into every working space. Even the crossing boards were gone, ripped out and replaced with a cosmetic surface never meant to flex under freight. The old reflective markers had vanished. The warning sign stayed hidden behind those fake stone columns. From the road, it no longer looked like an active spur at all. It looked like luxury. Rain threatened all afternoon without ever falling. The sky sat low and white over the entrance, trapping the smell of fresh tar, crushed shell stone, and overheated hydraulic oil so close to the ground it felt like I was breathing through a rag. By 2 o'clock, the surface had skinned over into something deceptively clean. The decorative pavers gleamed. The fake stone columns threw long shadows across a set of rails that no longer looked like rails unless you knew exactly where to look. That was the danger now. Not noise. Not argument. Camouflage. A white pickup with the Shortline Railroad logo rolled in hard enough to spit gravel. The driver, a track supervisor named Ben Hollis, stepped out with a yellow folder under one arm and a radio clipped to his vest. He didn't waste time admiring what the HOA had built. He crouched at the crossing, pressed 2 fingers against the tar-black edge where steel met pavement, and his mouth tightened like he'd bitten metal. "They buried the flange gap," he said. Those 4 words landed heavier than any threat Karen or the board had made all week. I handed him the same survey packet I'd already handed half the county. He barely glanced at it. He didn't need convincing. He needed measurements. A gauge stick came out of the truck. Photos followed. Close shots. Wide shots. Marker references. Ben called dispatch while standing right there between the columns they'd installed to make the place look grand. His radio cracked once, then cleared. "Spur remains active," he said into it. "Customer access not abandoned. Obstruction at private crossing. Liability exposure high. I need this logged and escalated." That changed the air. Until then, every warning had been treated like my problem. My documents. My land. My inconvenience. The second railroad operations put it into their system, it stopped being a neighborhood dispute and became a live safety issue with a train schedule attached to it. A black SUV from the HOA rolled up before Ben even finished his call. Of course it did. They'd been watching the property line like hawks guarding stolen silver. Karen climbed out in cream slacks and sunglasses too expensive for a work site, carrying herself with that same brittle confidence people use when they're losing and don't know it yet. 2 board members followed her, all stiff collars and clenched jaws. "You cannot be here interfering with our contractor," she said. Ben didn't even turn around at first. He was spray painting bright orange marks where the wheel path had been narrowed by paver edging. "Ma'am," he said, flat as a hammer, "I'm documenting an obstructed active crossing tied to freight movement." "There is no freight movement," she snapped. "Nothing has used this in ages." I watched Ben finally stand up. He was a quiet man, the kind who saved volume for machinery. "Dispatch confirmation says otherwise. So do the customer service logs. So does tomorrow morning's consist." For the first time all day, Karen blinked. Tomorrow morning. Not someday. Not theoretically. Not after lawyers. A scheduled move. Cars already slotted. Crew time assigned. Paperwork in the system. Steel coming whether her entrance brochure liked it or not. I pulled a folded sheet from my truck and handed it to the closest board member. Operating window. Car numbers. Delivery reference. The same information I'd sent before, now backed by railroad dispatch and time-stamped calls. He looked at it the way people look at a hospital bill they were sure insurance would magically erase. Ben opened the yellow folder and served them on the spot. Formal notice of unsafe obstruction, demand for immediate clearance, and a written liability warning naming the association, contractor, and anyone who had ordered the crossing altered after notice. No speeches, no drama, just paper, signatures, and the clean mechanical sound of consequence being handed over. Karen laughed, but it came out thin. "You're not seriously telling me a train is coming through that?" "No," Ben said. "I'm telling you a train is scheduled to come to the customer." Steele started talking before anybody saw it. A low vibration came up through the buried rails first, faint enough to mistake for thunder if you didn't know the language. Then sharper, rhythmic, iron striking iron somewhere beyond the tree line. Every head at that new entrance turned at once. The fake stone columns caught the morning sun. Fresh asphalt still held a wet black shine. White decorative gravel sat in clean little islands around the sign like this was a resort and not the mouth of an active industrial spur somebody had tried to dress up for real estate photos. The contractor heard it before Karen understood it. I watched his face change. Not outrage. Not arrogance. Math. Axle loads. Flange depth. Compaction. Liability. He dropped his coffee on the curb and started waving both arms at his crew. "Move the equipment. Now, get that roller out of there." His voice cracked hard enough to cut through the idling diesel and the HOA chatter and the birds in the palms. Too late. The horn hit a second later, long, blunt, and absolute. It rolled across the entrance and through my chest like a door being kicked open by God. People who had been smiling for photos started stumbling backward in loafers and tennis shoes. One board member nearly lost a heel in the soft shoulder. A landscaper abandoned a rake in the median and ran without looking back. The ribbon they'd tied between the columns fluttered in the engine wash coming down the line. Then the locomotive nosed into view. Yellow paint. Gray roof. Headlight burning. Company marks clear as daylight. Nothing dramatic about it, which somehow made it worse for them. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a surprise inspection. It was routine, scheduled, legal. A working machine arriving at a customer the same way it had done before any of those people decided appearance mattered more than records. The first set of wheels found the paved over crossing, and the whole entrance gave up its lie in one violent second. Fresh asphalt cracked with a sound like a rifle line. Blacktop lifted in jagged plates. Decorative pavers jumped loose and spun away. One of those expensive limestone caps on the column split straight through and dropped into the flower bed. Buried ballast punched up through the smooth surface in gray fists. The rail, half choked by tar and crushed stone, tore itself visible again under the weight. Hard, bright, undeniable. Gasps broke everywhere at once. Karen didn't move at first. She just stared as if refusing to blink might put the asphalt back where it had been. Then the second axle rolled through, and the entrance dipped again, deeper this time. The surface buckling around the flange path exactly where Ben had warned them it would. A shower of broken aggregate rattled across the sign base. Somebody screamed when a chunk of stamped curb skipped into the lane and clipped the tire of a parked Mercedes. Phones came out next. Fast. Homeowners. Delivery drivers. A teenager on an e-bike. The same people the board loved when they were posting holiday lights and clubhouse brunches were now filming their luxury gateway exploding under a freight locomotive in broad daylight. I could hear the shift happen in the crowd before I saw it. The little nervous laughs died. The whispering started. Then names. Who approved this? Who signed this? Didn't he warn you? Didn't the county warn you? Karen finally found her voice. Stop it. Stop the train, she shouted, like volume could reverse right of way. The engineer answered with another horn blast and kept moving at restricted speed, all steel patience and documented purpose. Ben didn't say a word. He just stood beside me with his clipboard tucked under one arm, while the crew car behind the locomotive bounced lightly over the joints, and the crossing kept failing section by section under real load. By the time the last wheel cleared, the entrance looked like a stage set after a fire. The center lane was split open. The fake symmetry was gone. One column leaned just enough to make everybody notice. Sirens arrived in layers. First, the county deputy's short electronic yelp at the gate. Then the heavier diesel growl of a fire engine easing around chunks of broken decorative stone. Then the staccato beep-beep-beep of utility trucks backing away from a lane that had stopped being a lane 10 minutes earlier. The air still smelled scorched, hot bitumen, wet concrete dust from the cracked footing, and that raw metallic scent torn steel gives off when weight has just reminded it what it was built to do. Nobody was arguing now. Residents who had been filming from a safe distance started lowering their phones when the railroad police SUV rolled in behind the county inspector. That changed the temperature more than the flashing lights did. A private embarrassment had just turned into paperwork with badges on it. The fire captain ducked under the sagging caution tape, took one look at the split pavement and the listing column, and said, "Clear the whole frontage. Now." Not dramatic, not loud, just flat enough that people moved. Karen didn't. She was standing near the busted monument sign with dust on her white sandals and a streak of gray powder across one shin, staring at the entrance like if she held still enough it might become decorative damage instead of structural failure. One of the board members kept trying to tell the deputy that this was an unexpected vehicle incident. The deputy looked at the exposed rail head cutting through the asphalt like a blade through frosting, then looked at the locomotive idling 50 yards downline, and wrote something without answering. That was the first real shift. It stopped being a story the board could narrate. Ben finally stepped forward, calm as ever, clipboard under one arm, reading glasses low on his nose, shirt darkened with sweat between the shoulders. He handed the county inspector a packet thick enough to make a point before a single page was opened. Easement map, active service notices, axle load documents, maintenance correspondence, the certified letters, the delivery confirmations, the site photos from before the paving, and the warning email with the timestamp nobody on that board was going to enjoy seeing again. I watched the inspector flip to the marked plat page and stop. Who authorized construction inside a recorded rail access corridor? He asked. Silence has texture when money hears bad news. This one felt granular, like grit between teeth. The association attorney arrived fast and smiling, which lasted about 8 seconds. He took the packet from Karen, scanned the top sheet, then asked for the county file number. His voice had changed by the time he got it. Lower. Tighter. Professional in the way people get when panic has found a necktie. Then insurance joined the pile. A field adjuster in a navy polo walked the broken entrance with a tablet in one hand and disbelief on his face. He asked whether the railroad had been notified before the improvement work. Karen said they were told the line was basically decorative. Ben didn't even react. He just handed over the weekly service log showing recent deliveries, car initials, dates, and consignee signatures. The adjuster read 2 lines and exhaled through his nose like a man watching coverage evaporate in real time. By then, the residents had drifted closer again, not to defend the board, but to listen. That was new. They heard the phrases in pieces at first: unpermitted obstruction, known easement, foreseeable damage, emergency access impairment, possible subrogation, unsafe condition. Legal words, but sharp ones. Words that didn't care about landscaping renderings or donor plaques. A woman from the third cul-de-sac asked, "Wait, so they knew trains still used this?" No one from the board answered her. The county inspector posted an immediate unsafe structure notice on what was left of the front monument wall and another on the damaged lane closure barrier. Bright orange paper against fake cream stone. Ugly. Impossible to spin. He told the contractor to preserve the site exactly as it sat pending measurements and instructed the HOA not to remove debris, patch asphalt, or alter the rail crossing area. By Monday morning, the smell of wet concrete dust had been replaced by fresh-cut ties, diesel, and the sharp mineral scent of exposed ballast drying under a pale sun. Crews in orange vests moved with the kind of careful speed that only comes after lawyers, inspectors, and railroad people have all said the same 2 words: put it back. The decorative stone columns were gone. The center island was gone. The smooth black ribbon the board had bragged about at meetings had been saw-cut, peeled open, and hauled away in jagged slabs that still carried white paint marks from the county measurements. Underneath all that vanity, the rails were still there, scarred but straight, like they'd been waiting for common sense to catch up. Not by the HOA's grace. Not by some neighborly compromise. By order. The railroad's maintenance supervisor stood beside a flatbed and checked each replacement crossing panel against a clipboard already thick with incident reports. Ben was there too, coffee gone cold in one hand, a yellow folder under the other arm, looking less like a man who had won and more like a man who had expected this exact stupidity for years. He nodded toward the temporary barricades and said, "Board council finally stopped pretending." That was as close to celebration as Ben ever got. The consequences came in cleaner than the destruction had. First the emergency assessment, then the invoices, then the letters nobody could wave away with landscaping language and a polished smile. The HOA's insurer issued a reservation of rights. The contractor filed notice that the work had been performed against documented objection. County code enforcement added penalties for the unsafe entrance feature and unauthorized obstruction within the crossing approach. The railroad demanded reimbursement for inspection, standby delay, crossing restoration, and operational interference. Every piece of paper had dates, signatures, and attachments. Every warning they laughed at came back with a page number. At the next board meeting, the room smelled like burnt coffee and panic. Nobody talked about elegance anymore. Nobody said vision. The president who had smiled through my documents kept her mouth tight and her eyes on the table, while homeowners learned what decorative arrogance costs when it collides with freight infrastructure. Special assessment. Legal exposure. Possible personal liability review for actions taken after notice. That phrase landed harder than any shout could have. Personal liability. Suddenly, the people who had acted like the neighborhood was their private stage discovered the spotlight could turn hot. I didn't have to raise my voice. I just laid out copies. Deed language. Easement records. Maintenance logs. Delivery schedules. Photos from before, during, and after the paving. Emails time-stamped with warnings. Certified mail receipts. Ben's earlier notices. The county postings. The railroad report. One stack after another, dry as old paper and twice as unforgiving. That's the thing about patience. It feels quiet right up until it becomes evidence. Restoration of access didn't look dramatic when it was finally done. It looked ordinary, which was exactly the point. Steel clean and visible. Proper flangeways. Signal signage back where it belonged. Trucks able to come in without climbing broken edges or guessing where the track disappeared under asphalt. My customer's next delivery rolled through at low speed on a gray morning, wheels ringing hard against freshly cleared rail, and every person standing near that entrance stepped back without being told. They understood now. Not emotionally. Structurally. The board changed after that. 2 resignations came first. Then an election nobody sleepwalked through. New council. New procedures. Real review before anybody touched utility corridors, easements, drainage, or access routes. Funny how fast respect for documents appears when fantasy gets itemized. I kept the orange unsafe structure notice folded in my desk for a while. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. People like that always think the law is flexible if the stone is expensive enough, the rendering glossy enough, the audience easy enough to impress. But asphalt doesn't erase steel. A vote doesn't cancel an easement. And a luxury entrance built on top of working infrastructure is still just a bad idea wearing makeup.